Hello, and howdy everyone. My name is Moonman, and today we're going to be talking about everything we know about naval content in Ashes of Creation. That's right, you'll be able to traverse the high seas, engage in large-scale combat, PvP, and PvE. No longer will you be landlocked like most of the MMOs we've been playing for the past 20 freaking years. You'll be able to hijack ships, engage in raid bosses, even ram other players' ships with your own ship all on the water. It's something that I'm particularly excited about. I think it's great that we are going to be fully immersed in the world, and that doesn't just mean the land, that's the water too. It's the whole world. All of Ashes of Creation, all of Vera is for us to take. How this actually came about is during the Kickstarter, all of you contributed enough money for them to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and open up naval content as well, and that's something that will be developed. I believe the stretch goal was 1.5 million, and if I'm not mistaken, the Kickstarter did blow past that. So without further ado, we're going to dive into everything we know about naval content with Ashes of Creation, from PvP to PvE, underwater dungeons, and so on. This includes coastal nodes, naval nodes, all the dynamics around wind, tides, and everything else. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Pun kind of intended. Naval combat. Oh yes. There are a variety of different ships that we'll be able to use. There are different sizes of ships, and a lot of these are actually going to come into play when it comes into our PvP and PvE dynamics. I think the whole idea is that different ships are going to fulfill certain niches, and when it comes to combat on the water, you might have the leg up if you are using X ship versus Y ship, kind of so on and so forth. I think from the team's perspective is that they have an idea that these ships are going to alter how you engage in battle, both PvE and PvP. With these various types of ships, they will hold different numbers of players, and we are going to dive a little bit deeper into ship types a little bit later, but something to keep in mind is that certain ships will have really different abilities. Some might be able to crowd control. Something that I've seen is that there will be harpoons on certain ships, and there's really only those two examples, being able to ram other people, being able to use harpoons, but they haven't really gotten too deep on this, so I think the team is still very much working on this before they release more information. But from what I can put together, naval PvP and naval PvE are going to be somewhat similar to what we see on land, and it seems like the idea is to really take all that you can do on land and make it available on the water as well. Let's start with PvP, and from what it seems like is that PvP on water will be similar to Sea of Thieves, or at least that's the closest proxy I can think of. As a ranged player, you will be able to fire off shots and abilities at your enemies. However, it seems like the main goal is really to sink other players' ships. That said, there will be the ability to hijack other players' ships, though there isn't a lot of information on how that mechanic works specifically. But what we do know is that if you do hijack someone else's ship, you'll be able to hang on to it for a certain period of time. But since we all technically have to build our ships, you won't just be able to hijack someone's ship and now you own it, right? You'll have a certain time period in which you will be able to control that ship, and after that certain time period is over with, I guess effectively it'll go back into the enemy's inventory or something of that sort. Additionally, if you sink an enemy ship, many times there are going to be multiple players on that ship. All those people on that ship will basically be marooned in the middle of the ocean. Once you destroy a ship, it becomes a wreckage, and all those players really have two choices as far as how they get back to land. Number one, they can die. Basically, they can just drown themselves and they will pop back up on land and resurrect there. Or number two, they can swim back. Depending on how far out you are, it may not be the best choice to swim back. You could be spending 20 minutes just swimming aimlessly in the ocean. I personally really like the design choices that the team is going for with naval PvP specifically, because it makes you really think about the risk and reward of doing battle at sea. You can either waste a lot of time swimming, or when you die, you end up getting experience debt. So once you get back to land, you end up wasting time trying to get that extra experience. For background, whenever you die in Ashes of Creation, you get what is called experience debt, which is basically just adding 3 or 4% extra experience to your experience bar to get that next level. So you really have to decide, hey, do I want to waste the time swimming back, Or is it worth it to just take the resurrection and waste that time trying to level up and kill more monsters and so on? A little more background, there is no recall function in Ashes of Creation, so you really are locked into one of these two options. I guess the third option is you might have a friend with a ship who can come pick you up. Maybe we'll go ahead and start the Uber app for Ashes of Creation. No one take that idea. I actually think it's a great one. We're going to go ahead and do that. Forget I ever said that. Are you stranded at sea? Did someone sink your ship while you were minding your own business? Do not fret, do not worry, for the Ashes Water Woober will give you a lift back to land. We charge a flat rate, so don't think we're too expensive for you. Don't waste all your time swimming back to shore when you can skip the headache and get a comfy ride back home. We'll provide blankets, food, water, and even a fire to warm you up after your embarrassing scuffle ended so poorly. That's right, I don't know why we have a fire on our ship, but we do. Give us a call and we'll save you today.
Ash's Water Woober is a Moonman business. Any similar business is not endorsed by Moonman and is likely a worse service. Ash's Water Woober is your only choice for a high-end ride to take you away from your sunk ship.
I forgot to mention that ships will be able to do damage to both players and structures, so I do wonder if there's going to be quite a few destructible things while you're on the water. Overall, we don't actually have a ton of information when it comes to naval PvP or naval content as a whole. That said, I do want to dive into PvE. One thing we do know is that the team wants all of the things you do at sea to be very adventurous, just like you were on land. They want you to be able to do a lot of the same things in a very unique way, because obviously you're on the ocean, you're on a ship, you're doing all these different things that are similar, at the same time very different because it's on the water. Let's go ahead and jump into naval PvE. There will be naval bosses, naval NPCs, naval raids, and even underwater dungeons. And if you watched my video on dungeons and raids from a few weeks ago, you'll be very in tune with how these will work, so I'm not going to rehash too much of it. Go and give those a watch if you want a little bit more information as far as that goes. Obviously, there are going to be some key differences between naval raids and naval bosses versus land raids and land bosses. Naval raids are going to be heavily focused on utilizing your ship, and the type of ship that you use is going to alter and change how you're going to engage in that interaction. The team has said that they do want naval content, specifically naval raids and bosses, to feel, quote, epic. So they want you to feel like your ship is an important part of what you're doing in that encounter. Since we know most of the content in Ashes of Creation will be open world, it creates a really cool and unique dynamic when it comes to interacting at sea. I can imagine when you're trying to do a raid boss, multiple raids all trying to secure the loot tag. Maybe one of those raids is trying to grief the other raids and get everyone to wipe so they can restart the boss and try and get it for themselves. Also, something that I'm particularly excited about is when one of those ships sinks, will those players try and go over to another ship and start attacking the boss from there? Will that even be a possibility? There's so much that can happen just with naval raids and naval bosses, especially with everything being open world, and I could not be more excited about it. Along that same line of thinking, which we'll dive a little bit deeper, I swear, in just a couple minutes, when it comes to ship types, is that it seems like the team wants you to have your entire raid on a singular ship, but there will be ships that cater to 1 to 3 players, ships for groups of 8, as well as ships for raids at 40 players. But I do wonder, hey, can a raid bring 5 groups that are all on the 8-player ships to a raid boss? Is that something that's going to be advantageous? Back to one of those ships sinking, can they then hop on another ship? Maybe a group of 8 brings a raid ship that allows for 40 people, and they then go hop on that ship after their ship has been destroyed. We're not totally sure yet. As I said before, there's not a ton of information on naval content, and that stems with naval PvP and PvE, but I am looking forward to the team unveiling a little bit more information about this before the Alpha 2 comes out. Naval content is supposed to be available in Alpha 2, from my understanding, though it seems a little odd that the team has really said nothing about this. The only thing we've seen are raft caravans. That's where you are transporting goods from one node to another node, and you need to cross some water that you can convert your caravan into a raft to then traverse water and then get back to land to cross a river, so on and so forth. Outside of that, we haven't seen much of anything when it comes to naval content. I'm not even really sure raft caravans play into naval content at all. I mean, it is on the water, but they only apply to rivers. Those raft caravans cannot go into the open seas. So I really want the team to give us more information on this, because it's one of those elements of the game that to me really differentiates it from everything else. Of course, there are a lot of other elements that differentiate Ashes from really any other MMO, but this is one of those ones that to me opens up literally the entire world for us to play. So I want to see more. I want to hear more. Steven, if you're watching this, give us more. Tell us about naval content. I want to know where we're at. I want to know what we're going to have in Alpha 2. On that note, we do know that there are going to be some things that are available in Alpha 2 as far as naval content, and some things that aren't. One of those things being that there is supposed to be naval content eventually in the Underrealm, but at first, that is not something that will be in Alpha 2. Most MMOs seem to just stop at the water. You might be able to interact with the water a little bit here and there. There might be a singular zone where the water is incorporated, but for the most part, you're kind of just landlocked. And I love that Ashes of Creation is bringing people into the water and immersing us across the entire world. It's something that, again, I could not be more excited about. That said, I do have some concerns about water content when it comes to performance. Many of you may not know, but water is pretty intensive when it comes to performance specifically. You have things like reflections, you have all of literally the water movement, the water interacting with objects, players, and so on. As a singular player, that may not be a huge deal, but when you start to have 100, 200, 300 or more players all in the same zone, and all this information needs to be passed from player A to player Z to player F, so on and so forth. That's a lot of things that you have to pass between, and really it's a hump to get over when it comes to being able to play in the water. From what we've seen with a lot of the water that's been showcased is that it does interact with objects and players. There's reflections, there's really everything that you want to see out of water to make it feel real. But I have a feeling that the team may need to dial it down just a little bit on the open seas, because I don't have a ton of faith that we're going to be able to pass that much information from me to 300, 400, 500, or 1,000 other players all in the same zone. We'll find out, and maybe by the time the game actually comes out, we'll be on the 60 series of graphics cards, and it'll be no problem at all. But I really want people with lesser computers, I'll say, to be able to play the game as well. So I am interested to see what the team has to say about how they're combating potential performance issues with naval content when there's large-scale battles taking place. Like I was just saying, we need more information, and this is one of those things that I really want to hear the team talk about. They've talked about performance and optimization. They did quite a bit actually in the last update with Node Wars, and it's something that's at the forefront of their mind. So I know this is probably something they've thought about, and they're probably trying to figure out, hey, how can we do this without degrading the look and feel of everything, but making sure that we're able to cater to these large groups, large scale battles, and all these different events that are going to happen when you're on the open seas. I know I've alluded to this multiple times in this video, and it's finally the time to talk about the different ship types, and more specifically, the different ship classes. Similar to everything else with naval content, there's not as much information as I'd like to know, but what we do know is that there are 3 different ship classes. You have 1, personal vessels that accommodate 1 to 3 players. You have frigates that accommodate 8 players, or a normal group, and then you have galleons that then accommodate a raid of people, so 40 people altogether. The thing that we don't know is how many different subtypes go into these 3 different classes, right? How many different personal vessels will there be? How many different frigates will there be? And how many different galleons will there be? And how will all these different vessels have different abilities, different use cases, and ultimately come into different encounters and play out differently? That's really what I want to see, is to have a very in-depth ship system where you could have 10 different galleons that are going to change how you're going to interact with a raid encounter. 10 different frigates that are going to change, hey, maybe we're going to do a raid with 2 of these frigate types, 2 of these, 1 of that, so on and so forth. What we do know is that certain classes of ship will require different numbers of crew members to operate the ship. So obviously for a personal vessel, you will only need yourself. For a frigate, you might need a few players, or maybe you'll need the whole 8-player group to be there to actually run the ship. And for a galleon, again, it might be a portion of the raid or it might be the whole raid. I personally hope it's just a portion of the raid. Obviously, when you're in a raid encounter, it might be a little bit weird to lose a few people and then be just completely stuck. That said, another thing to note is that you can only summon your ship when you're at a harbor. So you cannot sink and be in the water and summon your ship right there on the water. You have to be at land and specifically at a harbor to bring your ship out. In Alpha 2, we know that only these 3 ship classes will be available. There won't be other differing types of ship classes in Alpha 2. That said, there is no information as to whether or not they're going to include multiple types of these ship classes like I was talking about before. I really hope that's the case. I don't want to just get on the water and be like, hey, there's 1 galleon, there's 1 frigate, and there is 1 personal vessel. That kind of takes me out of the game a little bit. Then again, it is Alpha 2, right? It is so early on in the development that they really have a lot of time to craft all of these different things and make this a super in-depth system. There are actually 2 last ship types that I haven't talked about. Number 1, there are merchant ships, and these operate similar to raft caravans, where this is for transporting resources from one node to another node, specifically going from a coastal node to another coastal node. You cannot drive your merchant ship in a river, from my understanding, though that might be kind of interesting to see. And the other ship is specifically fishing boats. So these are going to be used for deep water fishing specifically. Apparently it's only going to be for obviously specific fish, but you're going to have expensive lures and really just get certain equipment and prerequisites done to enable you to partake in deep water fishing. I've alluded to harbors and coastal nodes quite a bit in this video, and I want to take a moment to explain exactly what those are and how they actually feed into each other. A little bit of background: a node is effectively a player-driven town or city, and player actions feed into developing that node. One big difference with coastal nodes is the fact that anything that happens at water or on the sea is not actually going to feed into that node. It's only going to take into account what's happening on the land. Bit unfortunate, but makes some sense. When it comes to harbors, and here's why they are connected to coastal nodes, is that a coastal node can choose to effectively take on a harbor. Initially, it will be a, quote, dilapidated harbor itself, or a dilapidated point of interest, and that coastal node can effectively take it over and pull it into their, I'll say, system, for lack of better words. One thing that I forgot about coastal nodes is that there will be nodes on islands as well, and these will be coastal nodes. There will be island chains in Ashes of Creation with these nodes, with these towns. Harbors are important for a number of different reasons. They will have a significant amount of influence on the water, but they also serve another purpose. As I've said before, you will need to be at a harbor to summon your boat, and harbors will enable you to upgrade your boat, build your boat, so on and so forth. This is also where you're going to get your quests out in the water, or for the water, I should say. These harbors are also going to come into play when it comes to node wars, node sieges, and so on. From my understanding, coastal nodes will not necessarily be part of the objective for a node siege, but the harbor itself will be included in some way, shape, or form. And the last thing that I want to cover in this video, potentially an important thing to all of you, is the dynamics of water. We touched a little bit on reflections and things of that nature, but more specifically, how it affects you as a player, and that comes in the shape of winds and tides and so on. Since, again, we don't have a ton of information, but we do know that there will be winds, and these will affect how you move in the water. This means that if you're going against the wind, you're not going to move as fast. It might affect your movement and your ability to turn and so on. That said, when we were watching the Raft Caravan preview, something that I noticed was it didn't feel like the winds or tides really played a heavy role in the movement of the raft specifically. So I hope to see on water and out in the sea that it's a little bit more of a degrading feel, I'll say. What I mean by that is if you played Valheim at all, if you were against the wind, it was very, very hard to move. And I don't think we should go that far, but I do think you should be able to feel yourself going slower, having a hard time moving, having a hard time navigating while you're going against the grain. Because what we saw was you could basically turn any which way and your movement kind of seemed unchanged. So the team said that they do have wins, but I think they're going to need to really hone this system in to make it feel impactful. Otherwise, it won't feel like it's there at all. Oh, and to all of you that have made it this far into the video, I want to say that I will be streaming on Twitch in the next couple weeks, and I will be doing it consistently, at least a couple times a week, and we will be talking about a lot of Ashes of Creation stuff. So go ahead and check the link in the description below where you'll find my Twitch. Give me a follow, that way you'll get notified when I go live. I will be locking into a schedule at some point in the near future, but I have to figure out my whole schedule before I lock myself in personally. Go ahead and give that a follow. I appreciate it. And you'll be able to see me when I go live, engage in discussions, and we'll talk about everything that has to do with Ashes of Creation. That said, thank you all for watching. I appreciate you sticking around this long. Go ahead and give me a subscribe and a like if you liked the video. There's a lot more content coming. I will say I haven't been able to make a video for a couple weeks because I was busy moving freaking everything. I won't go too deep into that. And that's why I have a different background now, and I have set up my whole setup in a completely different area. So thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. Moonman out.